Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Do you like movies?
Do you like sports?
I've never played that sport on the screen, but I really enjoyed how the movie made me feel.
Well then, have we got a show for you. The Adrian Moment is where my friend Ocean and I discuss the triangulation of sports, movies, and life.
We dive deep into the movies, discussing how they relate to and have affected our lives.
We will talk about why the sport matters to the movie, why you don't have to love the sport to enjoy the movie, and mine a few nuggets of meaning inside the story you may not have realized was really there.
After listening to our show, come join us for more conversations about the movies that portray the thrill of victory
and the agony of defeat.
Find the Adrian Moment podcast on your favorite podcast app and join us while we cover the sports you love and the ones you never think about.
You will never see sports or sport movies the same again.
Hey, psst. Hey, you see that Snickers over there? If no one's looking, you should just take it.
No! Don't listen to him, my son. That would be stealing, and stealing is a sin.
Sin Schmin, it's a friggin' Snickers bar. You deserve to have it. Sinning really satisfies you.
Repent, my child. Virtue is the only real snack worth savoring. For that candy bar is merely a gateway to nougat damnation. Has this ever happened to you?
Listening to the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're not sure what to think?
Then we're here to help. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III, and this season on All the Feelings, we're examining the 7 deadly sins.
You know, the fun ones.
And the 7 heavenly virtues.
Which are also a thing. Through personal stories, historical oddities, and way too much embarrassment, we take you on a thrilling journey through all the goods and the bads you hear about in church.
But without all that pesky church stuff. So come join us for All the Feelings Season 9, a sometimes funny podcast about being human. All the sins, all the virtues.
All in one place. Go to allthefeelings.fun to learn more, or subscribe to All the Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Game over.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew, is joined by Jessica, our comic book expert extraordinaire, to give you a primer as we get ready for Daredevil Born Again. This will hopefully be going out right before the new season of Daredevil is coming out. You know, we know that this is going to be, it's a new continuity, but is definitely going to be sort of very connected to the Daredevil Netflix universe, MCU. If you didn't see the Netflix MCU, and you wanted to kind of get an idea of what it was all about going into it, if you did see it a while ago, but you think there's something in your life worth doing rather than spending the next 36 hours watching all 3 seasons in a day and a half, I don't really understand your life choices, but, you know, there you go. You might think silly things like work or sleep or taking care of your relationships matter more than Matt Murdock. We're here to support you in those bad choices.
Yeah, so Daredevil has been in the comics since 1964. He was created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett. And the show gets the basics are very much the same. He was blinded as a child by radioactive ooze, toxic waste, weird chemicals exchanges based on the decade. Fun fact, it's the same stuff that made the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles what they are. That is Ninja Turtles canon.
Yeah, he's kind of like lying on it. He's lying near like a sewer grate as it like drips down, and it drips through the sewer grating, and then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles launches from the same stuff. But anyway, go on.
100%. Yes. So whatever it is, it gets in his eyes, it blinds him, but it enhances all of his other senses. So he can hear your heartbeat when you lie, and he can smell feelings, and he has basically radar or sonar or whatever. And also he's a ninja because of course he's a ninja. Yeah. He grows up, becomes a lawyer with his best friend and college roommate, Foggy Nelson. They open a law firm called Nelson Murdock with their secretary, Karen Page. Avocados at Law. And Matt proceeds to never, ever, ever show up for a single court case because he's too busy being a ninja. So Foggy keeps the lights on, and Matt almost dies every night. And the show gets all that pretty much exactly right.
Well, and I think the toxic waste part of it is important because, like a lot of things in Marvel, the actual explanation for where powers comes from changes canonically a bunch going back and forth. And in the MCU, there's been mostly an attempt to keep things a lot more grounded and to have like at least like vaguely pseudoscience explanations for how things happen. But it is important, I think, to think about like, there are people in the MCU who have a power set that is possible within humanity. It's just really extreme. Like the Black Widows, for example, are like, trained to the height of human ability, but it is still within the realm of human ability. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., such as like that, as opposed to someone who has superhuman abilities. And while it is true in our own world that people can lose one of their senses and have a number of others become fairly accentuated, that's not what is only happening with Daredevil. That there is a supernatural, not like it's mystical or magical, or although he certainly has a religious crisis. Yeah, I mean,
Sometimes it
certainly, like
is.
for his perspective, it could be, and it's never
I
really
mean, he
explained.
knows a lot of like undead ninjas and stuff, but his own powers are not magic, they're comic
Right,
book
it's comic
science.
book science, but it is still. This is not like, oh, ye average blind person whose hearing gets a lot better. This is like all of that turned up 8,000%.
Yeah.
So what is then, kind of starting with the Netflix show, but also, as you said, it builds on a lot of the aspects of the character from the comic books and other settings. What's really the essence of this character? Like, we have a lot of ninjas in the MCU. We have a lot of characters who go around as vigilantes and beat up bad guys. What makes Matt Matt? What makes Daredevil Daredevil?
I think the sort of the essence of his personality, his unique, essence is he's a disaster. And I mean, I think most superheroes are disasters if you dig in a little bit, but like again, this is very evident in the Netflix show. I expect it to be very evident in the Disney Plus show. It's very evident in the comics, but he is a character who desperately wants to do the right thing, does not know what that is, struggles very much with it, and has absolutely zero impulse control, which means that he often does what he thinks is the right thing in the moment, but perhaps is not the best thing to
Right.
do ultimately. I mean, I made a joke about him, never showing up in court and leaving Foggy to do all the work, but like it really is very much a case of, oh my God, a ninja thing is happening right now. I have to drop everything and go deal with it, which like in the long run can be harmful and unproductive, not just to
Right.
his career and his personal relationships, but like he is very reactive. He does not at all see the big picture or the long game ever. He is deeply religious. He's Catholic, and that very much informs his stories as he tries to figure out what God wants him to do. And well, it informs some of his comic book stories. Some of them don't care at all. But that is very much a guiding principle. And a lot of his stories, and especially the show, are very much embedded not just in New York City, but specifically in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York City, which, if you're not from New York, is about 1 square mile on the west side of Midtown Manhattan, which it's very funny seeing people watch the show and then find out how small Hell's Kitchen actually is. And Matt keeps saying like this city, and he's referring to a square mile of a city.
And I would say, as someone whose best friend grew up there, it largely does not exist. It has been very, very gentrified, and like there are still parts of it, but like if you watch the movie West Side Story is explicitly about Hell's Kitchen when it was run by like
A
a
little
little
north.
north, but like in that same when it was, and it's about like Irish and Italian gangs and Puerto Rican gangs and a lot of that stuff. A lot of that area has now been gentrified a lot and cleaned up. There's still some not great parts, but it's like I have friends who've gone to visit those
I
places
mean,
and are like,
even
this is not what the show is about.
No, I interned at Time Out New York in college. This would have been like 2005, and their office was in Hell's Kitchen. And like just walking commuting in from New Jersey, walking from Port Authority to 10th Avenue at that time was kind of dicey for like a 20-year-old woman. Like I felt a little bit uncomfortable. And now even in the 20 years since then, it's totally
Yeah.
gone. I mean, the association of Daredevil with Hell's Kitchen is a thing that emerged in the 80s, specifically in comics by Frank Miller, who wrote the comic Daredevil Born Again, that the new show takes its name from. Obviously, New York in the 80s was very different. And I will say that the show, the Netflix show, does say that Hell's Kitchen is suffering because of the devastation from what they call the incident, basically everything that happens in the first Avengers movie, which happens like 3 blocks away from the border of Hell's Kitchen, caused all this destruction. And really, the implication is it kind of knocked that part of the city back into the 80s. But yeah, it's all brunch places now, and the Javits Center. So if you go to New York Comic Con, you're in Hell's Kitchen.
And in a kind of really amazing way, a lot of the first season is about the attempt to gentrify Hell's Kitchen in the wake of all that's happened. And so it is very, very real in that way. I want to go back to the religious part, though, because I've said before, I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian. I'm a former pastor, but I'm obviously very on the progressive side of things. And I'm generally very frustrated with how religion is treated in shows like this, because either it's like the gods are literally real, like Thor and Loki are legitimate characters in this, and there's sort of an idea of like people are silly to build religions because, like, you know, they're not real. They're just more like people whose power set seems like godlike to other people. Or if heroes are religious, they're kind of delusional. And I really appreciate that with Daredevil. It isn't approached as like there's never a burning bush that talks to him. God is never a character on screen. Instead, it's that, like a lot of people, he has moral questions about what he's doing, but that the moral framework that he has learned is the one that he has learned as a Catholic, and that the Catholic, you know, and I think that both is like the religious aspects most specifically, but like also guilt is a big deal for a lot of people who are Catholics. And a part of his story is that his father died in like to give a very, very brief summary. His father's a boxer, and his father was never very good, but like had a fight that he thought he could win. And the mob asked him to throw the fight, and he decides not to because he wants his son to like experience him winning. And then he winds up getting killed by it. And, you know, knowing that your father like got killed because he wanted to make you as a 10-year-old proud is going to be a little traumatic for a 10-year-old. And like, I'm not Catholic, I'm Christian. I know you've spoken about it before, being, you know, one Jewish parent, one Catholic parent. I'd love to hear your like, to what extent you connect with the Catholicism specifically of this character and like the role it plays for him.
I mean, to be honest, not at all specifically the Catholicism. My father is Catholic, but I was raised Jewish. Like,
fair enough. Yeah, my apology there.
Yeah. My mom had custody most of the time. So we celebrated Christmas, but I didn't, you know, I was never raised Catholic at all. But I will say, one thing that I do appreciate about the show, like rewatching it again, revisiting it, it's evident that Matt is not the only Catholic character. Like Claire Temple, Rosario Dawson's character, is Catholic, and she talks about that. And it's never stated explicitly, but Foggy is also pretty clearly Catholic. Like when he references like a teacher, he says sister something or other. Like he clearly went to Catholic school. And I appreciate that the show shows a range of how characters can relate to the same religion. Oh, and of course, Matt's priest is a major supporting character in every season. And in season 3, we meet his mom, who is a nun. So there's, you know, the show focuses on, and also Frank Castle is a Catholic. The Punisher is Catholic. The show focuses on Matt's relationship to his religion, but it also shows people who have a much more casual relationship with it, or are lapsed, or have made it, you know, their calling. And I think it's very well rounded in that way.
Yeah. And I will say it tracks with the population of Hell's Kitchen. Like I said, like it is often for a long time it was very much an Irish and Italian, and then like Hell's, as you said, like the exact events of West Side Story are kind of the northern end, maybe a little past the border of it, but it's those same populations of, you know, Irish, Italian, Polish, Puerto Rican, other Latino, all Catholic in some way or another, comes in there. And as I said, but what I like about it is it's not theological. It is somewhat in the third season, but it's much more about just that's the framework of his ethics. And what I think is kind of like the framing question, certainly of the first season, but in some ways I think of his entire character, is a question at one point that his priest puts to him, because he's kind of going to confession and his priest figures out what he's doing, and they never quite explicitly say it, but his priest understands where it's coming from. And you know, one of the things that Matt is really wrestling with is, does he have to kill Kingpin, the kind of main villain of the show that he is dealing with in season 1 and then again in season 3, and also just this idea of violence in general. You know, that there is the part of where the Daredevil name comes from is that they talk about how the Murdock men have the devil in them, and that sometimes the devil would just come out. And which was a very, like, it's presented as kind of like, yeah, we're really tough, but I mean, that's a very ominous statement, you know, and that's the kind of statement that's often made, like, about, in a family where, like, you know, there can be abuse, right? There can be people who are just overly violent in bad ways. But he talks about that, like, at times he enjoys what he's doing. And that's exactly the question the priest puts to him is, and I'm trying to think of the exact wording. I think it's, he says, are you afraid that you will have to kill this man and you don't want to? Or are you afraid that you won't have to kill this man and you want to? And I just, that hits so hard, because I feel like that's the heart of Batman. That's the heart of, on this podcast for members out only episode, we did something specifically about vengeance and sort of where's the line between, like, working for justice and working for vengeance. And I think that's exactly what Matt Murdock is all about, is about, I am transgressing in both Catholic law and, you know, American legal law by taking violence into my own hands. But am I doing it to protect people, or am I doing it because I had terrible things done to me by criminals, and so I want to do terrible things to criminals?
Yeah, and again, I think it's a big part of, like, Matt not having that filter of, like, yes, he spends a lot of time on the show agonizing about what he will do, but he does that when when he's agonizing about whether or not he has to kill Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. He has no actual means to do that. So he has the space to agonize.
Right.
When he's in a given situation, there is no thought. There's just that impulse, and that anger, that rage is a huge part of that impulse. But he also talks about, like, the reason he became Daredevil is because he has these enhanced senses. He lies in bed at night, he listens to the city, and he hears how many people are hurting, and he is unable to stop himself from going out and intervening and helping. And those are sort of the two sides of that coin, that he cannot stop himself from helping good people or innocent people, or however you want to put it, and he cannot stop himself from hurting bad people.
Right.
And then, of course, once he's done whatever the thing is, then he agonizes about it, he feels guilty, and he's like, oh, what have I done, and prays and stuff. It's the cycle.
And I think one of the things that really hits into it as well is that, I mean, in many ways, I feel like he's a zealot, he's a crusader, and that he's kind of aware of that. And that one of the things that can happen is zealots don't often care a lot about collateral damage. And one thing, especially season 1 focuses on, is that there are times where, by taking some of the actions he does, not only is he putting himself in danger, but he causes his friends in danger. He causes innocent, like Claire Temple, who becomes kind of night nurse. So I don't think they ever officially use that term, but she's kind of one of the anchors of the entire Netflix MCU in a really wonderful way, as this nurse who takes care of everyone, and also gets to sleep with a number of really attractive people. And Luke Cage treats her a lot better than Matt Murdock does, and God bless him for it, because they're great together. But
yeah, if you're gonna pick a Defenders guy, or a Defenders anyone, like, if you're gonna date a Defender, there's no question, it's Luke.
Yeah, like, I think Matt Coulter and God, who plays Matt Murdock? Well, I can't remember his name now.
Charlie Cox.
Like, they're both beautiful men, but Luke Cage is a little better. But, like, Daredevil, like, gets connected to her because she finds him And he's immediately like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna from your apartment start like beating people up. Oh, by the way, now you have to leave for 6 months." Like, just he just doesn't think about it. And she gets, I think, like every by the end of season one, everyone in his life is really pissed at him because
Well, she also, like, actually gets kidnapped by the Russian mob and beaten trying to get answers because
I,
they're trying to get answers on his identity. I referred to this, to a friend as I was rewatching as like, "Oh, I like" you, like, vaguely remember things, but you don't remember just how bad they are? I had forgotten about Matt and Karen's shared quest to get every brown person in Hell's Kitchen killed because
yes.
like, the how Matt's carelessness with Claire's safety
Hmm.
is bad. Um,
And the safety of a young,
and
again, not white, brown boy who is, I think a neighbor of Claire's.
Santino, I think.
Yeah, but who Claire takes care of a lot, and he also gets him. I mean, he gets kidnapped even before Claire does.
Yep, he gets maimed to get information on where Claire is, who then gets beaten to get information on where Matt is. Um, but Mrs. Cardenas, a client that Nelson and Murdoch are trying to keep from getting gentrified out of her apartment, is murdered. And most egregiously, Ben Urich, who is a reporter that Karen is working with to expose all of this, gets killed very directly as a result of Karen's complete recklessness and
Hmm.
utter lack of concern for both Ben's safety and his feelings, um,
Yeah,
in that, like, dogged pursuit of, "I must have the truth, and it doesn't matter what else happens," and in that way, she is very, very much like Matt.
I don't want to go too deep into like critiques of the seasons. They're not perfect by any means, but just because I want to be focusing this mostly on a primer. But just to build on that, to me, the most frustrating thing about Karen's character is there's a scene in the first season where another character who's one of the bad guys is directly threatening her and talking like, "Look, I just want to make a deal with you." But he's kidnapped her, and it's clear that like he's going to do terrible things to her and her family if she doesn't go along with it. And she winds up through a series of events getting the drop on him and killing him. And she's haunted by that. And on some level, I appreciate that because a lot of times in these shows, like our heroes kill bad guys and feel nothing about it. And every indication I have from, reading about stuff from like soldiers or cops or anyone is like, you can kill the worst person in the world. And like the fact that you have taken another human life, like that does something to a psyche. And like, maybe you're fine, but a lot of people are gonna have nightmares. A lot of people are gonna have a lot of trauma about it. And in this case, she's very upset about the white person who was like very, very threatening to her. And it doesn't seem like she's sad about the fact that these other people around her keep getting killed. But you're right, she doesn't seem to be personal responsible. She doesn't feel a personal accountability for it, which is frustrating.
Yeah, and to be clear, it is not that Matt and Karen are being intentionally written to not care about people of color. It's that the show overall often does not treat people of color very well, which is a thing that was fairly consistent across Netflix MCU shows, with the obvious exception of Luke Cage.
Hmm.
Like Jessica Jones also had some real similar problems in this vein, and the less said about Iron Fist, the better. So, I agree with you. Like,
Hmm.
we don't
Yeah.
need to get bogged down in critiques of the seasons, but that is a true thing, and I really, really hope that the new show handles that better than they
Yeah.
have in the past.
Yeah. No, I think so. And I do think that's one way in which one part of the gentrification of a lot of those areas is that white flight. And I only bring that up because like it is written at a time when there was a lot of poor white people living in those neighborhoods, and that's not the case for the most part anymore. And so like one of the things that happens is you have like Foggy and Matt and Karen as white people who are in the neighborhood, but almost everyone that they're working with as either criminals or people they're saving is a person of color.
Mhm.
With the exception of the Russians, who it's a whole other thing. But yeah, getting a little too bogged down there, but just kind of pulling back to what more of kind of like what we need to understand about Matt Murdock going through this. Let's talk about him as a lawyer because he is a lawyer. Him and Foggy, like I remember I went into this show wanting like I love legal dramas. I loved Law and Order. My parents were lawyers. We watched a lot of those kind of shows growing up, and there's less of it than I would like, but I do think there is some of it, and it feels like one of the real kind of themes of the show that I think is a theme in a lot of superhero stories is, can you work within the system or do you have to go outside the system? And so, like as I said, part of that idea at the end, part of that theme of season 1 is, can he trust the legal system to deal with Kingpin, or does he have to do it himself? And he winds up like using a lot of his outside the system violence and the like in order to get confessions out of people so that Kingpin can get arrested, and that he kind of like he can be the lawyer side of it again. But then Kingpin breaks out, so he has to fight a street fight about it. And these themes come up again in season 2 and season 3. What, how would you sort of say, like, how is this an important part of his character? This conflict of, do I win as a lawyer or as a vigilante?
Well, I also think it's important to note that he is specifically a defense attorney.
Mhm.
That, in the 60 years he's been around in the comics, he has not always only been a defense attorney. He's definitely worked on the prosecution side. For a while in the 70s, Foggy, or maybe the late 60s, Foggy was the district attorney and Matt was an ADA. There was a run where Kingpin was the mayor and Matt was deputy mayor. He's done he's been a line cook. Like, he's done all sorts of stuff. But I do think the fact that he is specifically a defense attorney is really interesting, because it puts him in a lot of these stories where he will literally catch somebody as Daredevil and then be in the position of representing them, which is something that we see in season 2 with the Punisher. And it really sort of highlights that contrast and that contradiction in what he's trying to do, and that he so often doesn't know what the right thing is. And yeah, I think it helps to articulate that this is a character who is very much constantly thinking about what is the correct way to proceed, and what is the right thing to do, and what is the right way to do it in a way that, for example, Iron Man doesn't really worry about these things. He's like, oh, I have a problem, I better build a robot. Like,
Right.
that's his only solution to anything.
I think a lot of the heroes are looking for like what feels like the right thing to do, and from Matt, it is feeling, but he's looking for the rule. He's looking, which I think is again a very kind of like coming from a Catholic Jesuit education, like, that's very much about like, what's the moral code, what's the moral thing to do. And while I said there's a lot in season 2 that I don't love, one thing I really like about it, especially the first half, is it kind of sets up Foggy and Punisher as these two extremes that he feels like he is somewhere in between. Because Foggy is we have to trust the law, we have to work within the system. Even if the cops are corrupt, find the good cop. Even if the judges are corrupt, find the good judge. And he doesn't want to be that. But the Punisher is the one who keeps saying, like, you're stupid even if you do beat them up outside the law, but to then arrest them. Because he has a line like, you beat them up, they go to jail, they get out, I shoot them, they're dead, they don't get back up again. And I'm mangling the quote, I'm not quoting it exactly, but they're kind of positioned these two poles that he's trapped between.
Yeah. And I don't know, I don't have this thought fully articulated, but I feel like there's like a step further that I don't know Daredevil stories necessarily go to, because it's like, okay, do we follow the law or do we not follow the law? And then what if the law is corrupt? What if the cops are corrupt? What if the judges are corrupt? What if the politicians are corrupt? But it rarely interrogates it. Pretty much Daredevil stories tend to position what is right and what is following the law without corruption as the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's fair.
And I think that's another layer there that could be unpacked more.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I want to talk more about that because in some ways, actually, one more of the kind of like foils against which he's played is Kingpin himself. And Kingpin, we know, is going to be in the new series. And I definitely want to talk about that. But let's talk for just a minute about Matt Murdock, Ladies Man, because and it's presented in this interesting way where part of it is both like Charlie Cox is a very attractive man, Matt Murdock is an attractive man, and watching Charlie Cox kiss a number of people is a very fun thing to do, and people like doing that. And I think, but they also kind of make a joke of it even within the show that he is kind of a player, and he does. And Foggy is both jealous at him, but also kind of rolls his eyes at him. And like, as someone who both, I will loudly advocate for my rights as a disabled person. I'm an amputee, for those who don't know, and for like, the rights of disabled people in a ableist, unjust world. I'll also get away with bullshit because oh, I'm in a wheelchair, officer. I'm so sorry. My life's so hard. Please don't write me that ticket. I don't never actually said that directly, but like I've cut to the head of a number of lines because people have let me in a wheelchair. And so I both have this like grudging admiration, but also kind of rolling my eyes that like apparently like, understandably, Matt doesn't see people, so he can better see a person's face if he touches it. And it's a very kind of like intimate thing to do. And as Foggy points out, he never seems to want to do that except with attractive women. And so he's kind of using this as a flirtation technique, which I'm both
One
like,
exception.
uh-huh.
He did. Foggy confirms Matt did it to him too. They're very good friends.
Yes,
I'm just saying.
that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, talk a bit about kind of what we saw from Netflix and the comics about the role of romance in, because it feels both like it's like kind of this joke that he's a player, but also that it's a sign of just how fucked up his life is, that he cannot have a healthy relationship because he is such like like his life is the mission.
Yeah. Well, first, I will note that from what I've seen, blind people saying the touching somebody's face to know what they look like is a myth. It's not a real thing, which I actually love because that it confirms that this is just a line that
Yeah,
Matt
it's
uses
totally
on
just
people,
like
which
a
is
like, yeah,
hilarious. And
come
the
back to my
the
room to see my art collection. Yeah, it's one.
exactly. He literally goes to an art gallery to flirt with Kingpin's girlfriend and
Mhm.
tells her he's getting art to impress ladies as his flirting method. Like yeah,
He asks her to take his arm and show him around. Yeah, it's
he absolutely uses it. He's like, "Can you show me?" Like in the very first
uh-huh.
episode when he and Foggy see their office for the first time, and they meet their realtor who is a woman. Matt's like, "Oh, can you show me around the space?" And she's like, "Oh," and like takes his arm, and Foggy is rolling his eyes in the background, and it's
Yeah.
very funny. Um, yeah, I think it's such a fun and interesting aspect of his personality, and it's also one that I think again goes back to like the complete lack of impulse control because like he knows he's charming. He knows that he can generally get out. I mean, the show just treats it as women, but I'll say people who are attracted to men and people who are
Mhm.
attracted to Matt Murdock specifically to go along with what he wants if he turns on the charm. It does not always work, but I love that you can repeatedly see him pulling it out when it's not a good idea. Like again,
Right.
flirting with Vanessa at the art gallery or like
Which, to her
well
credit, and she's a great character, she sees right through it and calls him out on his
she
bullshit.
She does, but she's like it's a great scene the way they're bantering back and forth, and I always
Mhm.
laugh when Fisk walks in and Matt's like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
Like it's so good. Oh, sorry if I just
No, it's
maybe
fine.
put an E on your podcast.
No, we've had E's
Um,
for a long time now.
okay, good. Um, but like there's a bit late in season 1. This is after he's had like an almost romance with Claire. They've kissed. They think that something's going to happen there and then she realizes how violent and ruthless and, you know, out of control he is, and she's like, actually none of that, thanks, and they break it off. and then he almost dies, and she shows up to patch him back together, and he tries to flirt with her again.
Yeah.
And it's like, buddy, what? And he's like reaching for these scripts. Like I've seen a number of people interpret him as being neurodivergent, possibly on the autism spectrum, and what you were saying before about his always looking for rules, but also the way that he falls back on scripts, on this sort of charming women thing that he does over and over again. He does it to Jessica too. Like it's very Jessica Jones, not me,
Right.
Jessica. Although I would let him. I have met Charlie Cox in real life, and he doesn't do that, but he's extremely nice. Um, but I think that's really interesting. And then once he gets into a relationship, he's the worst goddamn boyfriend on the planet. Like
Oh
he's
yeah.
terrible. And there's a very funny stretch of like the back half of season 2 where he's like bouncing back and forth between Karen and Electra, and the question of who he's in love with seems to be whoever he had a scene with most recently.
Yeah.
Like he cannot focus, and it's like he's constantly flirting with women and trying to get like, cuddle up to them, and then flames out disastrously the minute that he gets anywhere. And I think that's extremely in character.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see where this goes in the new show, because they're keeping Karen, who I hope they don't go back to a romantic plotline with the two of them, because that did not go well. And I think Karen should have more self-respect than to try it again.
Agreed.
But they're introducing 2 new characters, Heather Glenn and Kirsten McDuffie, to the cast, and they are both former love interests of Matt in the comics.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I really love this part of his character for a couple of reasons. And one of them is, for me as a disabled person, like disabled people are often presented in media as kind of like childlike or innocent, and very often, there's a lot of great research on this, very strongly desexualized. And there's a lot of conversation about like to what extent Daredevil is or is not good disability representation. And while I am myself, my disability is mobility and mental health related, I don't have a vision issue. I do not have a disability related to vision. I've heard from a number of people within that community, but also disability more generally, who got to share my attitude of like, because he basically has a superpower that for all intents and purposes erases his disability, he's not the best disability representation by any means. But in this one regard, at least, him not being the perfect guy, him being kind of a player and a little bit sleazy, but he never, there's never a moment of non-consent in any way. There's never a moment where he puts people in danger, but it's never the James Bond kind of like, I'm going to seduce the girlfriend of the bad guy, and who cares that the bad guy will find out and hurt her because of this. Like, there's none of that. But
He's not disrespectful.
Yeah. No, he's just kind of, like you said, he's got a line. He's a bit of
slutty.
Yeah. I mean, I want to defend sluttiness. That it doesn't have to be like a
Yeah.
little, player like that, but he definitely is. And it's also one reason why, while I don't love the representation of him in She-Hulk, I do really like that, like, She-Hulk is like, I smash, gender stereotypes, and I smashed Matt Murdock. Like, it's very much about her having been the sexual aggressor in that relationship, which
the
is a fun
walk
twist.
of shame it was everything to me. I loved him in She-Hulk. I would say that the Netflix Daredevil is in keeping with like most modern portrayals of Matt Murdock, but there is a version of him in the comics that is much closer to the She-Hulk version, and I love that version. I so enjoyed and I know that Charlie Cox does love that version because he's read the Mark Waid comics, and I so enjoyed getting to see him play that and knowing that he was probably having a great time.
Good for him. Good for him. Yeah, and it's fun to see that. And I want to get back to one or two things about the Netflix show, but I will just say, like, seeing him in now kind of a bit, the fact that this show is supposed to be more specifically in the larger MCU, I'm really interested in part because it does make me think we might get more of the legal side of things, because I don't know many of the comics, but from some of the like, if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that Civil War is one of my favorite stories, both the comic book and the movie. And we don't get this in the movie of Civil War at all, but that in the comics, like a lot of the battle over the Sokovia Accords and registration and all this is fought in the courts. And Matt Murdock is often the lawyer who is like arguing on behalf of the superheroes who are getting in legal trouble because of the Accords. And Jessica Jones is the private investigator working for him. Like, it's just all these characters get played into that. But yeah, so like I like the Netflix version a lot more. I'm dark and emo. I want the dark and emo, but the fun player part with She-Hulk is great too, and I wouldn't mind if there's a little, if we can find a way to make it congruous with each other, I'd be very happy.
Yeah. I will say, I don't know how much legal stuff there will be in the new show. It doesn't seem like there is a comic called Daredevil Born Again, which I think I mentioned earlier. The new show doesn't seem to have anything to do with that plot wise. Like, they
Uh-huh.
don't seem to be, except for the fact that the Kingpin is a major character. But one of the characters I mentioned, who's the love interest of Matt's in the comics, Kirsten McDuffie, is a lawyer as
Right.
well. So
And we have, I
that
mean,
implies law stuff.
I think this was before She-Hulk, but either way, one of his other introductions to the MCU is that he was the lawyer for Peter Parker, Spider-Man in No Way Home. So, we're gonna get some
Although,
of that.
I will say, watching some of that Punisher trial,
Oh,
uh,
in season 2.
particularly the part where he's supposed to question Frank, and he asks the judge for permission to treat his own client as a hostile witness, makes a speech, and then says no further questions. I was like, you gotta stop lying to teenagers. You are not a really good lawyer.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
all foggy.
Yeah, Foggy does most of the work there, and Matt comes very close to sabotaging it. But he catches the brick that almost hits Peter Parker because he's a very good lawyer.
He learned that at Columbia Law. It's brick catching 101. It's a really important class there.
It's true. It's true. Well, the last thing then I really wanted to bring in, because I think it is such a part of the Netflix MCU version of Daredevil, is Kingpin. Partially I think I think Charlie Cox is a very good actor. If you told me there's one person who gets to win an Emmy for Daredevil, I would say thank you, Charlie Cox, but Vincent D'Onofrio is taking this home. He plays Kingpin in what is, I think, just a phenomenal performance. And they really kind of highlight the idea of how similar Kingpin is to Daredevil, in that both of them had traumatic childhoods that involved the deaths of their father due to the criminal underbelly of this part of the city. Very different involvements in it, though. And I do think that while I know in other portrayals, Kingpin is just like a guy who wants to get lots of money and have lots of control, in the Netflix MCU, and I think in some of the comics, he is very much presented as he has just as much of a protective love for his city, New York City, as Matt does, but he has a different version. A, he has a different version of how to protect his city, and B, he's a lot more willing to hurt other people intentionally to get it done. Talk a bit about kind of how you saw Daredevil, how you saw Kingpin in the Daredevil story, and his importance in relation to Daredevil, and kind of what that might look like going forward.
Yeah, I mean, so Kingpin is absolutely the number one Daredevil villain from the comics. He's the most important Daredevil villain, which is funny because he's actually originally a Spider-Man villain, and he
Right,
continues to be a Spider-Man villain to this day. Like, he fights Spider-Man as much
right.
as he fights Daredevil. Um, but yeah, there's no contest. Like, if you're asking like who are the most important Daredevil villains, it's Kingpin, and then you go like way further down the ladder and you're like, I guess the Hand, and then you're like, I don't know, Stiltman,
Yeah.
which I cannot believe we're getting a fourth season. We have still not seen Stiltman. I'm furious, and I would like all the money for my Disney Plus subscription back. But he's got a suit that it has like extendo legs that make him really tall.
We're just gonna move right along.
He's amazing. Anyway, um, yeah, I think giving Kingpin a motivation does make for good storytelling.
Mhm.
Although I don't think it necessarily makes him more believable, or maybe it's I don't know. I had this debate with a friend the other day where I was like, I don't think villains need a reason to be greedy and cruel because I can see what's happening in our world. And
Mhm.
she was like, yeah, but that doesn't work for a story, even if it's true in real life. And I mean, obviously, it's perfectly fine for most supervillains in comics, but I do think that it adds nuance
Right.
to Fisk's portrayal in the comics that, yes, he very much, I'm gonna alter the phrasing of what you said. He very much believes that he is doing something for the good of Hell's Kitchen. I don't know that I would agree that he loves Hell's Kitchen, or my question is, what is it about Hell's Kitchen that he loves? Because he seems to want to raze it to the ground and kill everybody in it. And so it's not the buildings and it's not the people. Um, but he has convinced himself that he does.
Mhm.
And that is very compelling. I will say I did get kind of tired of him
Mhm.
after a while, especially in season 2 when they bring him in for 2 episodes, even though he's not really a character in that season, and then they just let him like give a bunch of really long speeches that don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And it did feel like the writers were so enamored with their own writing for him and with
Mhm.
Vincent D'Onofrio's performance that they just kind of they gave it way more air than it needed. Obviously, he is in fact a major character in season 3, and so he's like earned his position there. And it's a different situation. Um, but I I do hope that they remember that Matt Murdock is the main character
Mhm.
and don't like because I think sometimes the show forgets that and it thinks the Kingpin is or it thinks the Punisher is, and they're not. And I will also say, and I feel like you and I have had this conversation. I'm real tired of men with daddy issues. I'm real tired of villains saying we're not so different, you and I, which I did know at least one character saying in at least once in every season. Season uh Fisk says it in season 1.
Mhm.
Frank says it in season 2. I think Sigourney Weaver says it to Iron Fist and Defenders. I was like, "Okay, enough. We're all the same. I get it. Kumbaya. Stop it." Um, so
It's the
yeah,
MCU
I
version of I've got a bad feeling about this.
exactly. And like I trust Vincent D'Onofrio. I think he'll do a good job. Um, but I think that the character is more effective and has more impact when he is used with restraint.
That's fair. That's fair. I will say I saw season 1 very differently, and probably because I had no connection to Daredevil before I saw season 1. I
Oh,
d
me neither. That I started reading the comics because I like the show so much.
Oh, okay. Well, because what I was gonna say is I do think that in many way, like to me, season 1 is 2 origin stories. It is the origin story of Kingpin and the origin story of Matt Murdock. And like, yes, I think they're both great actors, but if you told me Vincent D'Onofrio was gonna get Best Supporting Actor Emmy, I'd be like, no, no, he's just Best Actor. Like, because I think he is like it is just as much his story as Daredevil's story. And I don't mind that because I think it's so good. I do think you're right by season 3, it gets a little much. And in season 2, I I think my main objection to how invested they got in writing Kingpin into season 2 is that they forgot to write an actual compelling villain for most of season 2 into it. So that was kind of bad. But that's a topic of another topic. But yeah, I
We can have our extremely negative and here
uh-huh.
are all the problems episode another time.
Well, although actually I think what you did bring up as forgive me, you volunteered yourself now for the members only episodes, which by the way, you can be a member for only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get ad free content, you get bonus content, and you get full bonus episodes, and you get to help us keep the lights on. Please look at the show note please look at the link
That
in
sounds like a bargain to me.
right? Please look at the link in the show notes. But in those the bonus episodes that are fully just for members, each time we're looking at kind of a core question. And so we looked at like accountability and civil war, and we looked at like vengeance as motivation. And one of the ones actually that now I want to do is should villains be relatable? Because I'm very big on the idea that like, because I do think like even in our own world, I think there is some explanation to how the villains of our world became the greedy, horrible people that they are. And yes, this is in part because I recently watched The Apprentice, but you know,
Talk
also
about origin stories.
right, but also just but yeah. That being said, like I think it's a very interesting question to have, and I really do love that about Kingpin. And so let me like get so yeah, I think that would be a really fun episode to have about like should every villain have a relatable backstory, or should they all be should at least some of them be just like mwahaha ultimate power. But let's talk about Vanessa then, because Vanessa I think is one of the most interesting characters. She is the woman who um Kingpin is his girlfriend, becomes his wife by the third season. And this is a very different portrayal than we've seen her in a lot of other things. And my understanding is that this is a little unique. Like to give another perspective, if you've watched the Spider-Verse movies, in the first Spider-Verse movie, um, Kingpin is the villain, but part of what he's doing is that in that movie, Vanessa and his child have left him because they've seen his violence, and so they're trying to reverse time so that like
Didn't they die too? Like they like got hit by a car while they were leaving him.
yeah, they were like running away from him and got hit by a car. And yeah, so he wants to go back in time, but so in other words, like whereas in this, like Vanessa is like a true believer in his vision and like stands by him. And what do you think of the way Vanessa is portrayed in that? And would you want to see her in this?
So I'm actually going to contradict myself here because my frustration with Vanessa is that I don't feel like we know why she's doing this or why she is the way she is. Like
Uh-huh.
we get a whole episode dedicated to Fisk's backstory, and we have flashbacks to him as a child, and it's all setting up like who he is and how he became the person that he is. And he meets this woman who seems to be a normal person. He's like, by the way, I'm committing murder on a massive scale. And she's like, great, I'm so on board.
Uh-huh.
And there's no, like, I think the actress, Ayelet Zur, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
She's brilliant, and she makes the character feel so complete and so magnetic. But I'm like, lady, why are you okay with this? And I would love to know more
Mm.
about that. And I'm frustrated that we don't. In terms of
It-
other, oh, go ahead.
Can I just say something on that? This
Yeah.
may be because I rewatched the show in November of last year. But to me, like there is a mystery of it. It's the same mystery of how do so many people vote for Trump? Like because more than anything, it's that she doesn't want to be afraid. She does, and she like feels like he's the man who will make her not have to be afraid. And it's both like totally baffling, but I also feel like I have to believe what she's telling me of why she likes him. And it's like, yeah, I agree with you. It's like, can't you see through this? Can't you see that he is just as dangerous? But there's a whole storyline of where she knows that he's a dangerous person, and she gives him her gun. She learns like she doesn't have to be afraid with him, and it's
I
both
guess
like
I never got the sense that she was afraid before. Like
that's fair. Yeah,
I think it would work, but
yeah.
I don't know that they did the work to set that up.
Well, and here's where the like connection to the modern politics, where I'm like, what are you people so afraid of? Like, let people use bathrooms, let people come to this country. Like, that's kind of where I was coming from. Is that like,
Yeah,
the fear isn't actually justified, but someone can still speak to it. But anyway, moving away from my own personal feelings.
In terms of how she's been portrayed, I don't know that she's been in other media necessarily outside of this show and Spider-Verse, but in the comics, she's actually totally the opposite, because Fisk is a Spider-Man villain, and then he meets Vanessa, and she doesn't want him to be involved in crime, so he gives it up. He quits. Like he's done. He's entirely done. And then he has to come back to, or they're living, I don't know, I don't remember, Italy somewhere. They're living out of America. she has to come back to New York for whatever reason. And some of Fisk's enemies try to kidnap her. And in the ensuing brouhaha, she is seemingly killed. And that is what triggers his return to being the Kingpin. And that is what triggers him. Like, that's the first time he appears in Daredevil comics. That storyline, that is what puts him back on the scene.
Interesting.
And so she is totally opposed to his criminal enterprise. She is, of course, not dead. She ended up in the sewers. She is now it's implied sex slave of the sewer king who rules the sewer people. It's very messed up. Matt rescues her.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole thing. And then some like 20 years later, there's another fascinating story with her where they have a son who we see in Spider-Verse, Richard, who tries to kill Fisk because that family is not healthy.
Right.
And so Vanessa has him killed. She's like, I love you, but you went after my husband, so now I'm killing you even though you're my son. And then there is a very, very, very long storyline where like Matt's life is falling apart in every single possible way. And there's one mastermind at the heart of it. And it turns out to be Vanessa. And she's like, I could have had a happy life with my husband if it hadn't been for you screwing everything up. So I screwed everything up for you. You're welcome. By the way, I'm dying of cancer. Goodbye forever. And then she dies. And he's like, huh.
I can support women's rights and women's wrongs when it comes to Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, she is a great character in the comics. She is fascinating. Again, the sewer people story is very gross and upsetting.
Yeah.
But like when she comes back in the 2000s, even if it is very brief, she just, and this I think is something that Ayelet Zurer's performance really captures. She exudes power when she's on the page or on the screen. There is something about her, like this is a woman who is totally in control of herself and what she's doing, and will always figure something out and stay one step ahead. Like, and that is what makes her so compelling and so magnetic.
And I will say that goes into, I think one of the things that, again, I think maybe I give the readers too much credit, but I think it's very intentional, is we do see the romance between her and Fisk develop. And Fisk as a romantic character is 100 million miles different from Murdock. And it's some of, I think, Vincent D'Onofrio's best acting. He's awkward with her. And he is so heartbreakingly vulnerable. I mean, I think it's part of why I fell in love with the character. And then you watch him do these horrible, terrible things. But it's like, like Matt Murdock has Riz, and D'Onofrio, like, Wilson Fisk does not. And I do think that it's like, I don't necessarily think it's that like Matt goes after vulnerable women in any kind of like a predatory way, but I do think that there's an extent to which like part of why Vanessa just laughs him off, like she banters with him, but is just not falling for it at all, is very much the reason why she's so much more taken in by Fisk and his vulnerability. And I think that's a wonderful contrast, because to me, it's not saying that Fisk is better than Matt. Matt is genuinely trying to do right things, and Fisk is a monster in a lot of ways. Like, we see him, what Matt's devil is that he'll punch people a lot. Fisk does things with a car door that just, I don't want to spoil, but everyone knows, everyone's seen it, knows what I'm talking about. And it's brutal. But also, like, the times that Fisk is the most brutal is when his mother is threatened, or when Vanessa is threatened, or when I think him in Hawkeye is very bad. I think him in Echo is good, but also, again, where his family is threatened. And
I will say,
kill people just
with the car door scene, that's less that she's threatened and more that he was embarrassed. He says, "You embarrassed me in front of her." Like, that's the line that he's screaming.
That's fair. I'm more thinking about like what happens later when, again, like when Karen gets Ben Ilra killed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, it's a very sort of like the masculine, like, I possess these people, and so you're threatening me and embarrassing me and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Although, to give him credit, I do think he is extremely respectful towards Vanessa. Like, he he listens to her boundaries. He even listens to, like, sometimes in the very early interactions between them, she'll be bantering with him and he'll take it as a rejection and sort of like very politely back off. And she has to be like, no, 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 I was kidding. It's okay. Keep going.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, you're right. It's very sweet. And yeah, he's a monster, but he's also talking to a girl he likes and he's not good at it, but it's working.
It's so, and he also is incredibly rich, so he does things like, I rented out the whole restaurant because I wanted to have a nice dinner with you, you know.
Yeah, but again, it doesn't come off like a douchebag move because he did it because he can't like be around. Like when he's like, yeah, and I got this really nice bottle of wine for you, and she's like, wow, you did a good job picking it, and he's like, I didn't pick it, it was my employee, who I guess is also my only friend.
Yeah. It's a real sort of
Hope he doesn't die by the end of the show.
And again, another part, at least his like, I'm going to go into a homicidal rage because you did something mean to one of my people, includes that guy who's
Wesley.
male. Yeah. So it's
fun fact about Wesley, who's like a major character in season 1. He shows up only very briefly in like an early Frank Miller Fisk story. He's like a random minion, and he gets killed off like in that story. Like Wesley is not a long running character. He's just like it's just a name that they grabbed from the comics.
Oh, interesting.
But then after the show, they gave Fisk a new Wesley, and I'm like, does he just call everybody Wesley now? Is that just, he's like, I'm not going to learn your name. Your name is just Wesley. And then if anybody out there has seen Clone High, I'm not going to explain it, but it's a very funny joke if you've seen Clone High.
I haven't, but I've heard good things. Well, all right, this is probably a good place to wrap up. We are going to have a bonus section for our members. Again, $5 a month, $55 a year. We're going to talk about some other Netflix MCU characters who might come into the full MCU itself. But Jessica, any other last things that people need to know if they're going to start watching Daredevil Born Again?
I feel like we haven't talked enough about my very favorite character, Foggy Nelson.
Yes, let's talk Foggy.
He's the light of my life. He's the only reason that Matt Murdock eats, both because he's the one who makes the money and because he probably orders Matt's groceries for him. Not because Matt is incapable. He is obviously extremely capable. He just forgets to do stuff.
Yeah.
I love Foggy. I think Eldon Henson's portrayal of him is fantastic. I'm very worried they're going to kill him off. And I'll cry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Foggy is such an important character for him, and in part because I do think in a lot of these shows, they have a male best friend, and all they ever really do is banter with each other. And the male best friend might be a little mad at him for like half an episode when like he finds out that he's really this superhero, but really, you know, otherwise they're fine, you know. And like think about like Iron Man, like yeah,
Brody.
Brody, thank you, Rhodey. Sorry,
Rhodey.
Yeah, Rhodey like gets kind of mad at Tony Stark, but really it's Pepper Potts who he has to have this like deep relationship defining discussion when she finds out who he is and like all this stuff. And yeah, he gaslights Karen Page longer than I would have liked him to, but it's it's Foggy who finds out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and they have this like entire episode and really going on for the whole rest of the show. And like there needs to be a lot more homosexuality in TV and a lot more male homosexuality, and I'm always okay with that. But I also think that one of the things that suffers a lot is that we very rarely see emotional, important male friendship. And so seeing this relationship that I think, you know, fan fiction writers are going to take it in a romantic direction, and I have no problem with that. But I'm very much happy with the canon that they're just very good friends who love each other very much. And that Foggy feels this very deep sense of betrayal when Matt, you know, he finds out about this. And also the sense of like, you know, he understands why Matt wants to do this, but he's mad in part because he's like, my life is better with you in it, and you are risking that every day. And I hate that. And I just, it made me really, Foggy is really the moral heart and soul of the show, like the moral center of the show in a way that I love, but just also the importance that the relationship between the two is really a big part of what made me love it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing Foggy be back and hoping we get more of that.
Yeah, he's absolutely, he's Matt's rock. He is in the show and he is in the comics. He's the only character who has been there since day one and is still there now. Like, he was in Daredevil #1 and he's still, I mean, they're in a fight right now in the comics. Like, currently in the comics that are coming out as we speak, Foggy is possessed by a demon and they are in a fight because of how Matt went to hell to rescue Foggy and then stayed behind and died and then came back with amnesia and was a priest and didn't tell Foggy he was back. But a lot of friends
As you
have
do.
fights like that.
Yeah.
This is very common. But yeah, he is such a vital component to Daredevil, to Matt's life. And yeah, like I mean, especially given your love of ethical quandaries in superhero media, like the fact that they have this lengthy fight that is like, I am so upset that you hid this from me. I am so upset that you couldn't trust me. I am so upset that you made me complicit in all of your law breaking as your legal partner. Like, the intricacies of like the way that their lives are intertwined, like personally, professionally, are so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, Foggy Nelson is literally my favorite Marvel character. Like, any actual superhero, I love him.
And the show recognizes that he's got some game too. It's a very different kind of Riz, but he's got some Riz too, and even some
I
power.
love Foggy and Marcy; they're great together.
And he can like kind of bring her back from the depths. And just to say one other thing, and again, kind of just the gender of it all really matters to me. The dynamic of two best friends, one of whom is a lot more conventionally attractive and a lot more gregarious and a lot more successful, and so the other one is always in their shadow. That's a dynamic that we've seen a lot explored between two women or two high school girls, or like Yellow Jackets is a fantastic exploration of it. I don't see it explored. Wicked, yeah, another one. I don't rarely see it explored between two men very often. And granted, it matters to me because this was very much my high school dynamic with my best friend, who is still one of my best friends, and I love him dearly. But if the two of us walked into a room, I'm always in his shadow until I start talking. And maybe that's why I talk so much, but who knows? But
which is also the Foggy thing.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and so Foggy being kind of the more goofy one and the more laughable one, but therefore everyone being like, who's that cute guy brooding in the corner? You know, that I just don't see that dynamic as much in male friendship, but I think it very much exists. And so, yeah, I just imprinted on this relationship so much. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. To our listeners who haven't gotten to explore a lot more of your thinking, I know there's a lot of places online and in published book where they can find your words and your thoughts on everything from Daredevil and his relationships to Squirrel Girl and her many outfits over the years. Where can they find the works of Jessica?
Yeah, so I do a lot of writing about comics for Book Riot, so you can check out my writing there. I will have an article coming out. I believe it's scheduled for March 18th, comics to read if you're watching the new Daredevil show. So that'll have some recommendations for comics that are similar to the show or that are just like really good reads, if you want to check that out. Yeah, I also have some published work in a book. I have a short story in Swordstone Table, which is an anthology of Arthurian retellings that came out from Vintage Books a couple years ago, and you should check it out because there's a lot of really cool stories in there.
Yeah, definitely, very, very worth getting, and we should have links to all that in the show notes. So, Jessica, thank you so much. To our listeners, thank you so much. To our members, stick around a little bit more. We'll have a little bit more Jessica, and everyone else, may the force be with you.